Services to establish provisions regarding the powers and duties of the Chief and Office of Emergency Management.
President.
Sarah Harris.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that further reading of Senate Bill 1416 be dispensed with. Journal show it's been read the third time at length, section by section, placed before the Senate for final consideration.
You've heard the request. Is there objection? Hearing none, Sarah Harris, you're recognized to open the debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senators, this legislation is near and dear to my heart. It's a step that continues from last year, the last session that we had. It's a big bill, but a lot of it's just corrections and moving things. But in 2021, the Office of Performance Evaluation did a study, and that was requested by the legislature, members of the legislature, and regarding EMS and the staffing challenges that we're seeing across the state. What we found was quite surprising, and what we found is many of our EMS services and personnel are being burnt out. Directors are finding a hard time retaining people. They're having a hard time recruiting. And funding is an issue. Ambulances are way expensive, $200,000-$300,000, maybe more. Equipment is expensive, and it's hard to fund volunteer EMS services with bake sales and salmon feeds, and it's just difficult. Idaho's a growing state. We have a lot of people moving in. We have a lot of tourists coming in that have discovered Idaho, and it's a great place to recreate. And it puts added pressure on our EMS people as people have accidents and do things across the state. One thing that OPE discovered that was a really big surprise was that our EMS service in the state of Idaho is not an essential service, like our police and fire are. And they are involved, or just as involved as the police and firemen are. When accidents happen, EMS is there. And anyway, that was a big surprise. There's a task force that worked throughout the year last year, a little over a year, that come up with some recommendations, and part of the recommendations are in this legislation. Just going through the bill, Senators, what this bill does is it moves the Emergency Medical Services Bureau out of the Department of Health and Welfare and into the Office of Emergency Management. And we've worked with the directors of each organization. They're very friendly to the idea. And as the Office of Emergency Management is ready for a part of the EMS service, and the Director of Health and Welfare will move it over. So it will take some time. We don't want to move it all at once, because if something happens, we don't want to be caught unaware. So it'll take some time, and the transition will be orderly. Page 3 of the bill is where one of the big changes are, and that's where the directors will coordinate the move and plan the transfer, and then propose a budget for the fiscal year 2026. Page 8 is where the EMS is declared as an essential service, and then page 9 to the end is just clean up language, technical language, wiring, if so to speak, as moving the Bureau from the Health and Welfare to the Office of Emergency Management, and then there's some language to update some technical terms and stuff like that. So the meat of the bill is in the first few pages. On the fiscal note, there will be no impact to the general fund in the fiscal year 2025. The dedicated funds will be used, but in the spirit of transparency, beginning the year 2026, the first year implementation of the projected costs will be about $2.2 million. And that is to start giving the counties, or letting the counties hire a coordinator in each county and start implementing the plan that the task force has been working on for the past year. it'll be the first step in about a 5-year process. So, and of course, it depends on the budgeting process that will happen in September when the Director of Office of Emergency Management takes over and sets the budget. So that's what the bill does, Senators, and it's an important part of the process, and I encourage your support. Just to tell you a quick story of how important this is to me. I've watched EMS as they've worked, and always been impressed with what they do, professionalism that they do it. I watched them as they tried to save one of my friends who died of a heart attack. But the way that they do things is neat. Another quick story. My wife and I, family and I, came home from church one day, and our yard, we lived quite a ways from town, and our yard was full of ambulances and fire trucks and people running around. And anyway, it was local EMS guys, and there's a lady that had, up in the mountains, that had been riding a horse with her husband and her friend, and she'd stumbled upon a hornet's nest, and those hornets stung the horse, and anyway, she got bucked off, and it messed her up, broke her ribs, and gave her a big concussion. And anyway, these guys in the yard they knew where she was, but they didn't know how to get there. And so they asked if I could help them get there, and of course, I live there, so anyway, I was able to guide them up to where she was. And Senators, Mr. President, Senators, it's fascinating to watch these guys work. It's just awesome. I wish everybody could see what I saw that day. But we had to find a place for the helicopter life flight to land, and so I was able to help them find a place for the helicopter to land and then transport that lady to the helicopter and watch the helicopter crew do the things that they do. It's just awesome. But anyway, Senators, this is the bill. It's an important bill, and I think it's something that needs to be done. It's something that the state needs. We need these people to be an essential service in the state of Idaho. And with that, debate is open.
Is there further debate? Senator Treacle.
Will the good senator yield to a question?
Senator Harris, will you yield?
Mr. President, I will yield.
Senator yields.
Thank you, Mr. President. Question I have right now, the costs of riding in an ambulance can be extremely expensive for individuals. Same with life flight, can be up in the thousands of dollars. I know that there's a fee per mile that ambulances charge. So by moving this to an essential service, does that remove all the charges from the individual that would have to pay if I were to utilize an ambulance ride? Like when I use fire and police, I don't pay for them coming out to do the service. It is paid through by my taxes. So I'm curious if this would do the same thing with the ambulance rides.
Senator Harris.
Mr. President, Senator from 11. No, insurance would still have to be involved in this process. And it's interesting to note that a lot of the services that these EMS provide, they get no compensation for. Some people don't have insurance and they do it for free. But anyway.
Mr. President, to debate the bill.
Senator Treacle, you have the floor.
Thank you. Senators, I have a difficult time increasing the size of government when I don't see much of a benefit to the individual. So there's no cost savings to the taxpayer. If from my understanding, if I still utilize an ambulance, this can still cost me anywhere from $500, depending on obviously it depends on the critical aspects and what I'm needed in this ambulance ride. And call something an essential service, but then still require the taxpayer to pay for it out of their own pocket when they utilize said service. We don't do that with fire. We don't do that with law enforcement. So I have a hard time increasing the size of government and more spending with no cost reduction to the individual that requires the services. So with that, since I don't see anything to the taxpayer, I will be voting no.
Is there further debate?
Is a disabled
Mr. President?
veteran. He has VA benefits most likely.
To debate the bill.
That will
You have
pay
the
for
floor,
the
sir.
ambulance.
Thank you, Mr. President. So this bill, I don't think I don't think there's an argument about the importance of emergency services. We all appreciate that. We all use that. I think we're all on the same page there. This bill, though, is about a massive government expansion. This is a massive expansion, and reading through the bill, it actually has expansion with more expansion baked into the cake. So it's going to get. We're talking about the bill like this, but the way it's written, it's going to grow and grow and grow because this new division will have rulemaking authority. They'll be able to send out grants, and really, the thing that bothers me the most is everybody complains all the time about the federal debt and Washington and the president and all that kind of stuff. We're at something like $34 trillion right now. Well, this bill, which I said has kind of baked into the cake a lot of federal money over several years, is going to further inflate that federal debt balloon. You know, right now we're adding, I said the other day, we're adding about $1 trillion to the federal debt. It's not ghost money, it's real money that we pay at the federal level.
Congressman?
We're adding about $1 trillion to the debt every 3 or 4 months right now. It used to take about 6 years to add $1 trillion. Now it's happening in every 3 to 4 months.
Yeah, Trump,
so this is just
during his
another
4 years,
way of
did
dipping into the federal
$7.8 trillion in debt.
Into the federal debt. It's going to make that national debt worse.
Tax cuts for the wealthy.
And I mean, with the numbers I'm reading, we'll probably be at $37 trillion in national debt by the time Biden's out of office. So this is just a step too far, and it's a massive expansion of government, and I would urge your no vote on this.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President,
Senator Just.
to debate for the bill.
You have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Funding for EMS is particularly difficult, as the Senator from 35 said, when you're in a high tourist area. You've got people breaking legs, you've got people petting moose, you've got people taking selfies with bear cubs, that sort of thing. But really, this is what I'm most concerned about. And certainly we have to be concerned about our visitors, but I'm concerned about me and you. I'm concerned that when we dial 911, no one will show up at some point. To think that EMS is not an essential government service, that just baffles me. In times of emergency, personal or public, I can't think of any other service more essential. I'll certainly be voting for the bill.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President,
Senator Beard.
boy, I almost needed EMS there for a second. I rise in support of the bill. I don't know if it's a mystery. A lot of people probably know my background. 32 years in public safety. As a young firefighter, paramedic, and at some point either managed directly or supervised the folks that managed our EMS program in a very busy LA area fire department. So I understand the folks that want to maybe say that this is an expansion of government. When the paramedic program came to California, it did so because it was seen by a lot of doctors, a lot of emergency people, that this is one way of kind of closing a loop and becoming what we called the safety net. And it was essential that they did that. Too many people were dying before anybody could ever get to them. I worked for mortuaries through high school and college. In the early mortuary days, when there was a bad traffic accident, let's say on the freeway, it was the mortuaries that responded to that before we had ambulances, before we had paramedics. And the bottom line is, if you were alive by the time they got to the ER, that was a good thing. But if you died on the way, they took you to the mortuary. That's just the way it was. What is this? It's an evolution of what we've decided is essential. And I'll address this part of it, which is amazing to me, coming from my background, to not look at EMS as essential. From my standpoint and the work that I did, whether it's integrated into the fire service or whether it's standalone, there's nothing that we do, whether it's hazmat, urban search and rescue, structural firefighting, water rescue, where EMS is not involved in that and necessary for us to operate. In many respects, needed to be on scene with us, you know, in the course of, with police departments, very often, not uncommon, for us to be called out for things that they have the statute authority to deal with, like just pronouncement of death. You know, they can do that by law through their training. As EMS folks, we needed to use a policy called 814, and basically it was a termination of death. I've had a nickel for times that I've been on a gang warfare site where they're just using EMS to do that dirty work of determining who's actually dead and who needs to be taken to the hospital. And I digress. I look at this bill as a concept, as an idea, as a promise to the folks that have been doing so much of this work in Idaho. This is an Idaho solution to an Idaho problem. We've recognized that there needs to be the shuffling the deck, so to speak, you know, not necessarily creating a new program, but realizing that possibly something needs to be looked at, evaluated. We had the OPE study. Why do we do these studies if we don't take a look at what the results of these studies are and act upon them? To me, it's difficult to sit here and realize that I feel very strongly that we need to address EMS. I can go into all other aspects of the need, but think about the volunteerism. And everybody loves to hear about the volunteerism. We've got folks that are doing EMS on a volunteer basis here. And like the good senator from 35 said, you can't run an EMS program with a bake sale. It just can't happen. And especially when you're requiring these people as volunteers. The typical person working at a bank or a grocery store who's got a pager or a cell phone that gets alerted of a call, that has to be in a position where he can leave his work and then to respond. And again, somebody made the point, the good senator from 15. What is your level of expectation in the state of Idaho? Is your level of expectation that you call 911 and you don't believe that someone's going to be there knocking on the door within 4 minutes? Or are you okay with an hour and a half? A body recovery versus somebody who's actually been saved. Again, I go back to this issue of essential. If it's essential to be integrated into the fire service and the police department, and those entities can't operate without the function of EMS, whether it's integrated or standing on its own, how is that not essential? That to me has always been a mystery to me. Again, are we growing government? There's nothing in here other than what is proposed in 2026 as seed money to get a program going. This is all about continuing the work of a task force who have recognized through a study that there's something more that we can be doing for the citizens here in Idaho when it comes to providing emergency care, to provide that safety net. There may be people, and I think I mentioned this last half of the session, that have more of a fatalist point of view. And I don't disagree with that to some extent. We all see things from our own perspective and our own lens. That if I'm out mowing my lawn and it's time for the good Lord to take me home and I have the big one, I'm just, hey, bury me where I lie. You know, there's some people that feel that way, but we're not addressing this issue to deal with the person who's the fatalist. We're dealing with this for the people that really think and desire to have an option, that there may be somebody that could come and be there within 4 minutes, who can defibrillate you, who could start CPR and all those things. If we did everything based on what our own preferences are and desires, we wouldn't be very good legislators, because we're here as a representative government to represent the concerns of our constituents. And if the biggest concern of my constituents is that their fear is growing government, then I guess we have to weigh those two things out. But as I see this bill, I see it as an idea at this point, a concept, a recognition that this is something that we need to look into in a dire fashion, because the folks that are involved in EMS in this state right now are on the verge of not being able to sustain their organizations, whether it's volunteer or even paid. And I won't get into all the monetary issues of what it takes to run an EMS program. But at some point, as citizens of this state, you're going to have to decide, is this a service that I want? And if so, am I going to consider it essential or not? And I think that's what we need to look at. But to call it growth of government at this stage, when all we're trying to do is shuffle the deck from what an existing EMS program is here in the state of Idaho to something that we see as a future better EMS system here in Idaho. I stand in support of this bill. I stand in support of taking a critical look at what I believe is necessary for us sustaining EMS and providing a service that I think is essential to the people of Idaho. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there further debate?
Mr. President?
Senator Zeiderfeld,
Thank you, Mr. President. To debate the bill,
go ahead.
I'm going to look at another piece of this bill that's kind of concerning to me, and it's on page 3, Senators, and it's line 32, and it talks about the powers and duties of the chief in office. It also says, in all matters of disaster services, the adjutant general shall represent the governor and shall, on behalf of the governor, coordinate the activities of all of the state agencies and disaster services. I'm kind of concerned by that because, to be honest, with our past history that we've had since 2020, I guess I'm just going to be honest with all of you. I guess I'm a little guarded in where I trust the man on the second floor when it comes to our state of emergency and who we're going to deem essential and non-essential. We're just talking about essential again here. And when I look at everything that they're going to put them over, I just don't know if I want to put my trust there. I mean, this is something that we really should look into. What exactly does that mean, in all matters of disaster services, and then shall represent the governor. I'm thinking it should be, shall represent the people maybe. And the other thing I wanted to bring attention to is there is about 2,000 volunteer EMS. And you know what, before I go any further, I really do appreciate them. And to me, they're essential. They don't need a piece of paper. But there's 2,000 that are volunteering that will now be state employees. So that is, something that we really need to really consider the cost on that and how we go forward. And then are we putting them under something that they are now going to have to answer to the governor if we ever get another state of emergency where they can't go out and take care of the people how they had done in the past because they were volunteers. I really adore them. I actually went in front of our hospital in Twin Falls and stood with the life flight crew and a lot of them because they were wanting to have their individual rights, so I just don't know if this is something that we can look at. I just don't think this section here is not really comfortable for me, and I don't know if I want to put our EMS under that kind of control, so I will probably be voting no.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. President. This has been a long time coming. We have looked at this, we have looked at this, and we have looked at this. There are OPE studies. We have had interim committees. We have had joint hearings. And so I just wanted to address the concern I just heard about the language on page 3. Senators, that's existing language. That's existing language. It is already there. We're not changing anything. That's existing language. But what we are changing, if you look at page 4, is we're actually bringing locals into this discussion. And so that's a really good change. So we're providing that balance. And many of the criticisms over the last several years, as we have looked at whether this is an essential service, whether this is something that people expect in our state, and how can we do that? One of the things that came up is maybe we should allow local option taxes. Let's allow our locals to just tax whatever they want and change these levy rates and give back that local control. We're not going to do that. And so instead of doing that, this is the opportunity to create this statewide look that balances those who are employees. It also balances those that are volunteers. Another criticism that's come up year after year is this is too big for the Department of Health and Welfare to manage. And so at many of the critics' requests, the good sponsor moved it finally in this piece of legislation out. And that's why you see a new creation to make sure that this service doesn't compete with Medicaid and child welfare and all of those other pieces. And so this really was in request to the criticisms and the concerns that we have heard over and over again. So I just wanted to offer that as perspective for some of the continuing concerns. And I think this, again, is such a good piece of legislation. And I really appreciate the senator from 5. I don't think anyone could say it better. I would urge your support. This is a long time coming and a great step forward. Thank you.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President,
Senator Taylor,
the stand-in debate of the bill.
you have the floor.
Before I start, I'm going to take a few seconds here and just pause. I'm a little dry. Good senators, that was about 10 seconds. I felt a little uncomfortable being quiet for that long, and I wonder if any of you felt uncomfortable wondering what I was trying to do here. Imagine how you would feel if you called 911 and you were met with silence when your loved one needs help. EMS in Idaho has been in existence for a very, very long time. The good senator from 5 and I have backgrounds that are very, very similar. He's more urban, I'm more rural. But they're very, very similar. When you are working and you hear another call and you know you can't cover that call, it rips your heart out. You rely on volunteers. That's free. It doesn't increase a budget. It doesn't affect the national debt. Volunteer is free. Idaho should be proud of what we have. We're not growing our government. We're merely changing one house to another house. It's allowing us an opportunity to continue to be the proud Idahoans that we have and to take care of each other the way we always stand in this room and say that we do. It allows us to take care of the people who come to this beautiful state. That's all we're doing here. We're not trying to grow government. We're not trying to do anything nefarious. We're just trying to make this program essential because the men and women who work in this are essential. And I hope you will vote yes. Thank you.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President, will the senator from 35 yield to a question?
Mr. President.
The President recognizes you, Senator Herndon, and Senator Harris, will you yield?
Yes, Mr. President.
The senator yields.
Senator from 35, I see on page 5 that part of the responsibility will supervise and administer an emergency medical services program, and then it gives some detail to that. And those are the lines being added, lines 15 to 25. Can you explain to us how EMS is different than fire and police, and why do we have something similar presently at the state level for the direction of fire and police services? And if not, how is EMS different? Why have we come to this condition where we have to insert ourselves into this space?
Senator Harris.
Mr. President, Senator from 1, there was a lot of questions there. How are they different? How is EMS different than fire and police? Well, for starters, a lot of our EMS people are volunteers. They do it because they want to. As was mentioned, a lot of them work other jobs and they're on call and they go. But where a lot of fire and police are not that way. There are similarities in fire, I guess, in rural areas where a lot of them are volunteer. But anyway, I forgot the other questions, Mr. President.
Mr. President,
Senator Herndon.
I'll go ahead and let the senator sit down. I will go ahead and weigh in a little bit of my concerns.
Sir, you have the floor to debate.
Okay, thank you. So my only concern is that I look back at the resolution that we did last year, and I see that I remember that debate. I remember the problem that we're trying to solve. We're talking about consistency in services. When I look at Bonner County and what I've seen over the years since I've been there for 20 years, we have a lot of volunteer firefighters, so talking about fire first. And then we have fire districts, and I remember I used to be able to call Chief Goodyear in Sagal, and it was very responsive as to what the needs of the community were in regards to fire response. And since then, we've seen consolidation of the fire services to Selkirk Fire and Sandpoint, and I've heard a lot from constituents in the last several months. We agree that EMS is an essential service, but we actually see less staffing countywide. District 1 is 3,000 square miles, 2 counties, and oftentimes, based on the staffing they have at any given point, controlled centrally by Selkirk Fire, we'll end up with the truck with one person on the truck, and there's not much you can do at a fire with a truck with one person. On the EMS front, when I first arrived in Sandpoint in 2004, we had a private ambulance service, and I remember they went out of business suddenly overnight. They were right in downtown Sandpoint next to Bonner General. And since then, the county has taken over EMS services. And there seems to be pretty good coverage on the EMS, but we still have, if you go out to Clark Fork, I have a very good friend who I just talked to him this past Saturday. I've gotten input from him on this bill, and he works as volunteer for Clark Fork and Hope Ambulance. And he tells me that the volunteers from their communities like the structure. It actually works pretty well, and he told me about a model for EMS service that's kind of being provided out of Sandpoint to cover Schweitzer Ski Resort and that area up the mountain. And all of them, though, a lot of the concerns is that centralizing management, centralizing control hasn't really turned out too well. It probably solves some problems and it creates other problems. And my concern is that now if we centralize direction, assistance, administration at the state level, we get even further away from the far rural areas, places like Priest Lake, Clark Fork. And I'm not comfortable supporting the legislation because the people who work volunteers in my area, while we agree in part of the bill, the declaration is an essential service, 100%, we're concerned about the loss of control I'm concerned about where this goes in the future. How much does the state provide in the future? How dependent do we become on the state? Do EMS volunteer programs that are currently working get pushed out? I understand there's problems, but I'm not sure this is the solution. I'll end up against the bill today.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President,
Senator Adams.
would the senator from 35 yield to a question? And
Senator Harris, will you yield to a question?
Mr. President, I'll yield.
Senator yields.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, I'll ask one at a time. I'm looking at the fiscal note here. and it says that the first year of implementation, the projected cost is $2.2 million. If this was to stay, if emergency medical services was to stay under the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare, is that consistent with the growth that they would see under that department as well?
Sarah Harris.
Mr. President, Senator from 12, yes, it would stay the same. The fiscal note would be the same. The program would be the same, regardless of where it's housed.
Sarah Harris, will you yield to another question?
Mr. President, I will yield.
Senator yields.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator, second question. It says future costs will be determined on local input. Can you tell us who that is?
Sarah Harris.
Mr. President, Senator from 12, yes. Local input are the county commissioners, local government, and most importantly, the volunteers. I want to make it known that the volunteers are not going away with this bill. No one's wanting the volunteers to go away. The volunteers are fiercely independent. The EMS Bureau knows that, and so this bill and the recommendations from the committee that met, the working group that met, are very cognizant of that fact, and so there is no a plan for a central authority from the state. They want the volunteers to remain that way and function the way they are now, just with added help.
Mr. President, would the senator yield to one additional question?
Sarah Harris, will you yield to another question?
Mr. President, I will yield.
Senator yield.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last part in the fiscal note, it says that there could be federal cost share for these services. If this was to remain in the Department of Health and Welfare, would those federal cost shares be available still?
Sarah Harris.
Mr. President, Senator from 12, as my understanding, it would be.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator, to debate in favor of the bill.
You have the floor, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, as I look at this, I think this does solve a problem that we do have throughout the state. I won't add too much because there's been phenomenal debate on this topic. But fundamentally, we have to address these issues. And if we don't address them at some point by shifting them over right where I believe they're supposed to be, under the Office of Emergency Management, if we leave them in health and welfare, the cost still goes up. So I don't see the downside of moving them over, and I support this legislation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Is there further debate?
Mr. President,
Senator Schroeder,
to debate the bill.
you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. So you don't have to work in local government very long to realize when you pull into the parking lot at City Hall and it's completely full of cars, something is awry. Because nobody really likes going to city council meetings. So one night, a couple years ago, some law students and I and our professor pulled into Horseshoe Bend for a city council meeting. We were going to talk about redoing the zoning ordinance. My breath sucked in because the parking lot was completely full. And they're like, well, what's going on? I said, you'll see. And I asked the clerk, is there like a 4th of July celebration or a birthday party? No, they're here for the meeting. But it wasn't about our stuff. It was about EMS. It was about the Horseshoe Bend EMS, which is all volunteer, and which was full of tumult and turmoil and anger and angst over the volunteers and the expense and the cost. Who's going to run it? Who's going to be the volunteer to do it? And I don't know how many of you have driven up Highway 55 in the summertime, but I can't think of a place where good, reliable EMS service is more important, particularly on Highway 55. But I will tell you that these EMS services, these $500,000 ambulances, and all of the expenses and all of the things these people have to do are borne by the cost of the taxpayers of the county from which these services are derived. Boise County does not have the levy capability to mount an ambulance service countywide. Elmore County, 3 ambulances. So when everyone lacking knowledge in physics decides to crash 63 cars on I-84 in the middle of the wintertime, 2518 and 2519, those 2 ambulances are out on the freeway, and 2525 has to leave Glens Ferry to come up to Mountain Home to provide coverage. And again, limited by their levy capacity. limited by their ability to bond. Elmore County is going to implement countywide development impact fees to fund the capital needs for ambulance service based on growth. But who are the 63 cars that crashed on I-84? They're not all from Elmore County, because I submit to you that Elmore County drivers kind of know what to expect. But what happens in Valley County and in Boise County and in Elmore County and Custer County is people from Ada County and people from not those counties drive up into those woods and get hurt and need help. And the people of Boise County don't have the ability, even if they could levy, their property taxes go through the roof to try to fund these essential and absolutely vital services, the consumers of whom are not from the county providing the service. I grew up in Idaho County, the largest county in the state. Our next door neighbor got murdered in 1983, and it took police 45 minutes to arrive. There was no need for an ambulance in that instance. But I'm very familiar with the geographic disparity of Idaho County and how critical EMS services are. You have all those farmers in all those fields all over that county, and you have people in the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness, you have people going down the Lochsaw River, and that county does not have the capacity to levy sufficient resources to acquire the EMS services that that county needs, even for its own residents. This is not growing government. This has nothing to do with $34 trillion of debt. This has nothing to do with not amending a provision where the Attorney General already serves the governor. This has to do with how you allocate and how you create a functional system that saves Idahoans' lives no matter where they are, and not have that ability to have your life saved be a function of the property value and the levy rate in the county in which those services have to be bought. This is the absolute best solution, and I strongly urge your aye vote.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President,
Senator Anthony.
just to declare that under 39H, I may have a possible conflict of interest. I have a daughter who's an EMT and one that's about to be certified as an EMT, and I also manage emergency services in my community.
Your declaration under the Senate rule will be noted in the Journal. Is there further debate?
Mr. President,
Sarah Carlson,
to debate the bill.
you have the floor.
I appreciate the debate from the senator from District 8. Between District 8 and District 7, our districts
Here
encompass
comes
a
the
huge
anti-United
amount
States
of
federal
wilderness
government
area and area that are not
testimony.
accessible by most EMS services. We have a challenge and we have a huge problem, which I knew coming into office that it needed to be fixed. I do not think this is the fix. We should be forcing instead of taking donations from the federal government, we should be taxing their land and receiving income from that land so we can provide EMS services to the people that recreate in our state. Because most of the time, the people that recreate in my district, they are not from my district that need the services. They do not understand how to survive in our area, and so they end up getting hurt. Our EMS personnel are phenomenal. The volunteers in our state are doing a phenomenal job. But I do not believe this is a solution, and I would like us to figure out a different one. This grows government. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Does anyone wish to debate the bill for the first time? Senator Trickle, you're recognized to debate the bill for the second time.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to bring up that obviously I don't think we're arguing here about the importance of EMS. It's extremely important. I've utilized it myself when ran over on the highway, and they transported me. EMS is a great system. It's spectacular, and I'm actually quite surprised to find out that it's not considered an essential service, because I personally would think it is an essential service. The question is how to keep it afloat. If it's dying and the cost is too high and we're not able to keep staff, right now at DMV, when you register a vehicle, you only pay $1.25 for emergency medical services. So there's a way to raise, I am actually arguing raising a fee here. We can easily raise the fees with that to help cover the cost. Government, especially here in Idaho at all levels, has a constitutional authority to protect the health and welfare of its citizens. And I think this is definitely within our scope of being capable of doing. Another thing I'd like to point out, without increasing the size of government or moving it around or making what changes, I don't believe we need to do this because, one, we could increase those fees. And another thing I'd like to look at is here we're arguing for, in my opinion, what is already an essential service, and it's having a hard time being funded as well as police and fire as well, in my opinion, is underfunded as well, but that comes from property tax, so on and so forth. But what I'm getting at is I can't help but find it funny that we're arguing about the cost for those EMSers. I'm not sure the ones that do get paid, how much they make, if volunteers are 100% salary free, or if they are compensated in some way, shape, or form. But, you guys have heard me say this several times. Look at the seats in government that make six-figure incomes. Imagine if we were to cap that at about 80,000 or 100,000 and maybe fund a program like this with that money. A 10% cut to all budgets across the way would definitely fund this, and I think it is within our purview, and maybe we should start putting our priorities in those positions, these essential frontline workers, teachers, EMS, our ISP, instead of ensuring that we have a very relative nice nest egg from the taxpayer. So just consider there are other ways of doing this and funding this, and I think much better ways of funding this without having to move around departments, increasing any size or any more cost to the public without actually seeing a reduction on their end when they utilize these services. Because remember, right now, the cost of an ambulance ride itself can be cost prohibitive to some people. And the joke has been made about, how much is it going to cost for me to take an ambulance ride to the hospital? I can't afford that, so I guess I'm going to have to drive myself. And that's really a sad state of affairs where we're at. And I would like to see it to where we can provide this essential service, much like fire and police, to where it is free to the individual that needs to utilize it. I shouldn't say free, it's paid through taxes and fees. But we here on the government level take on that responsibility and make that a possibility for these individuals to have that service and ensure that it is there. Thank you.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President,
For what purpose do you rise, Senator?
to debate a second time.
Anyone who wishes to debate the bill for the first time? Senator Bierke, you're recognized to debate again.
It's not like me to want to beat a dead horse, but there were some questions that came up that I thought I might be able to answer. Someone asked what the difference is between police and fire and EMS as far as being an essential service. There really isn't much. I thought I talked about that a little bit, of how they integrate, whether they're integrated into the service and the fire service or standalone. It's an interesting concept in any way you look at it. There's a governance model to this. And then there's this other thing called medical control. And that's really what kind of makes it distinct between police and fire. Because in a fire aspect, you have operational control over your troops, whether they're paramedics working for your fire department or not. But when it's EMS, they get their marching orders also from what we call medical control, would be the state board that deals with that, the doctors and physicians that are on that deal with what they can do. But we're asking a question about funding, the structure. We're not saying that someone's going to be a state employee. Someone can still be a volunteer. Someone can still work for a municipality in the fire service as a paramedic, with that agency. They can work for Ada County paramedics or in EMS and be separate. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a state employee. It means that at some point the state's deciding, are we going to take responsibility for making sure that the citizens of Idaho have this ability to call 911 and expect similar results no matter where you are in this state, rural, urban, suburban. We should all have the same expectations, and that's a big part of it. And what we're talking about here, and someone asked again, it's interesting. We talk about police and fire, but I don't have the statistics here, but about 80% of the emergency calls are EMS calls. And it'll always be that way. So whether it's a fire department that does their own EMS or it's a standalone EMS, when you start comparing the calls for service or an emergency, about 80% of those calls are handled by the folks of EMS. And literally we're talking about the money spent and what it would cost to transport somebody. You literally have a hospital that we're able to drop over the top of you in your worst possible day. The training that these folks have, just in ACLS alone, adult life, advanced life support, intubating, defibrillating, drug, needle thoracostomies. I mean, it's amazing what these folks are trained to do. And we're talking about the state realizing that we kind of need to support this and we need to provide some consistency. I talked about how it came organically from where I came from. It started at the very local level. But at some point, the state became the licensing body. The counties became the accrediting body. And everybody had their local and operational control. But of course, you had to be accredited and you had to be licensed. It's just the way it goes. Nurses, doctors, we all have to have our license and accreditation. We're just saying that the state has realized that something needs to change here. Something needs to be different than what we've done since the early 70s. We need to look at it a little more closer. And one of the biggest things is we took this out of health and welfare, which is this behemoth agency, and we moved it into Office of Emergency Management to give it its just due so we can focus on the importance. We can excise it from the minutia and really pay attention to it and figure this out. And I think that this bill is just attempting to do that. And again, I would also, along with the sponsor of this, appreciate an aye vote.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President, to debate the bill a second time.
Carolina, you're recognized to debate for the second time, there being no one willing to debate it for the first time.
Thank you, Mr. President. I remember last session, we were all here, obviously. There was a bill that created an account, and the argument was, we're just creating an account. We're not spending any money, we're just creating an account. Well, the next thing we did is we filled that account with a lot of money. So the arguments here that Senator from District 5 said, this isn't expansion. This is just this is for the future. We're going to spend money in the future. And it's just evolution. That's not expansion. Well, it's a 61-page bill. It sounds like expansion to me. There have been some straw man arguments thrown around today regarding the essential nature.
President, I object.
There's been an objection to the direction of your debate, Senator, and I tend to agree. Let's debate the issue, not the motives behind the other people debating the issue. You see the world one way, they see the world another way, then that's what makes the world go round. And so stay in your lane. Keep debating.
Thank you, Mr. President. People have, I've heard arguments referring to the essential nature of EMS, but I haven't heard anyone in here say EMS is not essential. Senator from District 8 said this has, quote, nothing to do with the $34 trillion in debt. But reading the bill, page 6, lines 44 and 45 says, well, a couple lines before that, lines 42 through 46, the director, when so designated by the governor and any other time subject to the standard appropriations and approval process of the legislature, shall have the power to apply for, receive on behalf of the state, and utilize any federal aid, grants, gifts, or monies made available through the federal government. We're not talking about monopoly money. We're talking about real money from the federal government. The senator from District 26 says this does not affect the national debt, when I would submit to you that it absolutely does, and it absolutely will. This is a massive, massive expansion of government, and I think we should think about that when we're voting. Thank you.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President, to debate a second time.
Senator Lee, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we've all heard a lot. Just for some clarification, what you just heard about the criticisms in this bill is existing language. So if the proposal is to repeal this whole system based on those arguments, that is different. Nothing herein changes that. That is existing language. It is already existing authority within this proposal, and there's nothing that changes that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President, to debate a second time.
Does anyone wish to debate the bill for the first time?
Mr. President, to debate the bill for the first time.
Nichols, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Listening to this debate has just got me to think about several things. And so I just wanted to share those that maybe we haven't thought about yet or should consider. So we don't know what this cost is actually going to be. And as I was looking into some information, we don't fund our local police or our local firefighters with state funds in this manner. I'm concerned with the movement of taking things from a local control approach to a centralized approach. Because normally when we do that, the demands will always escalate and the costs will always escalate. I think the issue with this bill is that it seems to be a down payment for a much larger cost that we aren't even anticipating. And we can look to Maine, the state of Maine, that went through a very similar process as what we have done here from last year and this year, where they were asking for $70 million from their legislature, and they were able to negotiate to $31 million, and they haven't even been able to handle that amount yet. So my concern is that by moving this around the way in which we're doing, and again, we don't do this with our police, we don't do this with our local firefighters, that this cost is going to be way more than what we are anticipating and way more than what it will be if we just leave it at the local level. And that falls back onto the taxpayers, unless, however, we start taking the federal dollars. And as it's already been pointed out, we're way, way in debt, and the states need to stop taking the federal money. So I think this is too much, too fast, with a lot of unknowns. And while I 100% agree that our paramedics are essential, they're important, I'm concerned with the unintended consequences and possibly the intended consequences of this bill going forward, and I won't be able to support this at this time.
Is there further debate?
Mr. President, this is one of those that probably whatever we say on the floor isn't going to change anyone's mind, and I'll call the question.
Okay, that is tantamount to a motion to limit debate. It's non-debatable, and it takes a second.
I'll second the motion.
And 2/3 of you have to agree to pass the motion. Do I need to be corrected at all, Madam Parliamentarian? No.
Mr. President?
Senator Winter, for point of order, you have a motion. So
I believe we do to get to debate the motion, do we not? Is it non-debatable?
we'll check.
All right, that's what I'm asking.
I think certain motions, when they are self-evident, I'm not a parliamentarian, I just play one every now and then. So.
very good one right in front of you. Just follow her direction. Okay.
Your mic is not on.
Rule 30. Rule 30?
Yeah.
30 non-debate. It's non-debate. It's self-evident.
Yeah, and there's no 60 seconds to explain votes, boy. And there's no 60 seconds to explain.
Yep.
It's non-debatable, call the question.
It's Rule 9. Moves the previous question. Senate will be in order. If you're scoring at home, you may want to read Senate Rule number 30, number 6. This is in the category. Man, you missed all the good stuff. Rule 30, sub 6, previous question. This is in the rule of non-debatable motions. So this is non-debatable. It requires a second, which we have. There's no explaining your vote. And the secretary will call the roll. A yes vote limits debate, and a no vote does not. It requires 2/3 for passage. Secretary will call the roll.
Adams. Anthem. Burnt. Bierke. Burtenshaw. Carlson. Cook. Den Hartog. Foreman. Grow. Guthrie. Harris. Hart. Hartgen. Herndon. Just. Lakey. Lee. Lenny. Lent. Nichols. Okonowitz. Robbie. Ricks. Ruckty. Schroeder. Semoroth. Taylor. Taves. Trakel. Van Orden. Wardingle-King. Winder. Wintro. Zeiderveld.
The vote count shows 32 in favor with 3 against. More than 2/3 having voted in the affirmative. The debate is over. The secretary will call the roll. Or the question before the Senate is, shall Senate Bill 1416 pass the Senate? The secretary will call the roll for the purposes of polling the members.
Adams. Anthem. Burnt. Bierke. Burtenshaw. Carlson. Cook. Den Hartog. Foreman. Grow. Guthrie. Harris. Hart. Hartgen. Herndon. Just. Lakey. Lee. Lenny. Lent. Nichols. Okonowitz. Robbie. Ricks. Ruckty. Schroeder. Semoroth. Taylor. Taves. Trakel. Van Orden. Wardingle-King. Winder. Wintro. Zeiderveld. Okonowitz.
The vote count shows 26 in favor with 9 in opposition. A majority having voted in the affirmative. Senate Bill 1416 has passed the Senate. Hearing no correction to the title is approved, and the bill will be transmitted to the House.